Some people were born to plant beans. Others were born to look after chickens, make corn cake, or complain about life. She was born to annoy others. The creature appeared here with the typical manner of someone who believes that the neighbor's grass should be the same color as hers. You know the type? Linen blouse, hair sprayed with expensive hairspray, the look of someone who has never seen a tractor in his life, let alone known what a real working day is. This story begins on a Saturday, the kind of Saturday where you just want to wash the porch, listen to some country music, and maybe take the tractor for a spin to stretch its legs. The tractor, by the way, is a separate chapter. A Massey Ferguson 65, Model 68, faded red, with a leather seat cracked by the sun, and a discreet smell of diesel oil and nostalgia. That's not just a tractor, it's heritage. My father taught me to drive that thing, and it has plowed more land than a politician makes promises at election time. But then, she came along. The woman. She came out of one of those gated communities that have sprung up like weeds around here. A bunch of identical houses with French names, as if giving a place a fancy name would solve its lack of soul. The lady, representing the Residents' Association, walked up to my door with a letterhead in her hand and an expression that was a mixture of disgust and superiority. We have a formal complaint about visual pollution on the rural perimeter of the community, she said, with that tone that says, "You're dirtying my Instagram feed with your existence." Visual pollution. From my tractor. The tractor that has already survived 3 droughts, a flood, and 2 separations. Mine and my parents'. It got under my skin like milk boiling on an old stove. Because, you see, it wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control, about power, about a woman who couldn't understand how anyone could live without following a book of plasticized rules in bold Arial 12 font. According to her, the tractor on the edge of the field harmed the visual harmony of the community landscape. What landscape? A cornfield, a chicken coop, and 3 cows that spend all day shitting. The woman wanted me to hide the tractor in a suitable garage. I asked her if she wanted me to order a Louis Vuitton cape for it too, but she didn't laugh. She never laughs. Her face is a declaration of war in itself. I tried to stay calm, because life has taught me that ignorance shouts, but wisdom chooses the right time to shout. But she wasn't helping. She handed over the printed notice, with 3 copies, look at the whimsy, and warned that if I didn't take action within 10 working days, the HOA, which shouldn't even have jurisdiction outside the gates of the condominium, would take legal action to confiscate the aforementioned object cited. That's how she refers to my tractor. The woman really thought she could confiscate something that my grandfather bought with his sweat, selling milk on the road, and she wanted to take it away from me for aesthetic reasons. That's the icing on the cake. What she didn't know, and this is where it gets good, is that I'm a lawyer, not one who wears a linen suit and talks tough at a book launch cocktail party. I'm a county attorney. I've been involved with land, farms, zoning, and everything that goes with the legalities of the countryside for 12 years. I can write technical opinions with my eyes closed, and I know every little limitation on the actions of these gourmet condominium associations that think they live in Switzerland. But I didn't tell her that right away. Of course I didn't. You learn early on that you can't fight someone's stupidity in a hurry. You fight it with strategy. I let her leave my property thinking she'd won. I took the notice and even signed "received" in my ugliest handwriting just to make a mess. When she turned her back and disappeared down the gravel road with her SUV shining in the sun, that's when I started to draw up the plan. And she had no idea what a legal storm was about to hit her ornamental garden. Some people never learn that it's different dealing with people on the ground. We may seem calm, quiet, like the kind of people who whistle as they get off the tractor with their sweaty shirts sticking to their backs. But inside, brother, we're a pressure cooker, just waiting for the wrong click to blow the lid off. And that woman, the visual pollution lady, made exactly that click. After her visit, I left my tractor parked in the same spot. I made a point of it. I positioned it in such a way that it reflected the afternoon sun directly in the rear-view mirror, looking at the condominium, just to provoke her. It turned into a movie scene. The tractor, like a stubborn relic, planted there like a war monument. And that's what it became, a symbol of resistance. Mine, my grandfather's, that of everyone who has ever been beaten by people who think that money and status buy everything, while she walked around in her muddy heels, thinking that she was going to solve everything on the basis of the HOA regulations. I pulled out some paper, because, you see, being a lawyer in these times is a kind of revenge that comes with a protocol, stamp, and notarization. I started with a zoning survey. Yes, friends, the woman was so obsessed with visual harmony that she forgot to check one simple thing: where the condominium ended. And guess what? My plot was 150 meters outside the association's jurisdiction. 150 meters! Which means that her notification was more invalid than a $3 bill. But I didn't stop there. I consulted the county's land use and occupancy law. I went through each paragraph with the calm of someone who has sued a farm for poisoning a stream and won. And there it was, in Article 47B, a beautiful paragraph that said in all letters, properties located outside the express boundaries of a private civil association are not subject to aesthetic regulations imposed by such entity. I even printed it out on A3 paper and framed it, because that was art. Even so, I let her hang herself with her own rope. I sat still for a few days, watching. She began to circulate and put pressure on the other neighbors. I saw one of the poor guys selling vegetables nearby being forced to paint his stall beige so as not to clash with the palette of natural tones. She started inspecting garbage cans. Garbage cans! And of course, she kept sending me letters, now threatening to sue the Municipal Works Department for accumulating agricultural waste. Ah, that was good. She called my tractor a piece of junk. I almost cried with laughter. By then, I had a dossier ready. 42 pages, photos of the area, maps of the subdivision, registry records, case law, and even a technical opinion that I asked an engineer friend to sign. The title? No Administrative Competence for Aesthetic Intervention in Isolated Rural Property. Yes, I'm one of those. If I'm going to fight, I'm going to humiliate with elegance. And then the day came. She called an emergency meeting at the condominium's community center. Guess what the subject was? The aesthetic threat of the tractor. Yes, she put it on the official agenda. I went, of course. I sat at the back with my shabby hat, checkered shirt open at the chest, and a notebook in my hand. She was standing, all imposing, with slides and even a graph of the fall in real estate values since the appearance of the red tractor. I swear, it was like a TED Talk of insanity. If we allow this kind of visual neglect, she said, we'll soon be surrounded by car wrecks, clotheslines, and chicken coops. The audience was divided between those who swallowed her theater and those who just wanted it to end so they could get the buffet at the end. I waited for her to finish her dramatic monologue, took a deep breath, and asked for the floor. I stood up, walked to the front with my dossier under my arm, and spoke as calmly as I could. First of all, good evening. Secondly, that tractor there, which you insist on treating as rubble, was bought by my grandfather in 1972, has plowed more soil than all the artificial grass in this condominium, and is worth more in memory and sweat than any standardized facade at number 8 Lavender Street. A buzz started. Some laughed. Others coughed nervously. Thirdly, and most importantly, here is a document proving that my land is completely outside the area of operation of this association, which means that this meeting, with all due respect, is as valid as wanting to fine the moon for not following daylight saving time. I handed out copies to everyone present, signed, initialed, with a seal of authenticity and everything. She tried to fight back. She took the microphone back, stammered something about the spirit of the community and that aesthetics is everyone's responsibility. Not when they're not part of the community, ma'am, I interrupted, with a smile at the corner of my mouth. Because it seems to me that, while you're worrying about the paintwork on my tractor, there are children in the condominium playing in the middle of the street without a decent sidewalk. But nobody wants to confiscate that, right? That was enough. Half the room applauded. The other half muttered that she was overreacting. And she left with her makeup smeared with anger, and the realization dawning on her that the world doesn't revolve around the aesthetics of her balcony. But she didn't give up. Oh no, that was just the first round. And she still had one more dirty trick up her sleeve. After that pathetic meeting at the community center, where she tried to paint my tractor as if it were an act of visual terrorism, I thought she would back down, that she'd understood the message, that she'd give up and go back to occupying her time with something more useful, like cataloging the decorative stones in the garden or leashing the children in the condominium. But no, she's back. It's always like that with people like that. When they feel they've lost in the field of reason, they resort to humiliation. And that's exactly what she tried to do to me. The week after the meeting, the woman filed an application with the HOA itself, that little gourmet club where she was in charge, to reclassify the association's boundaries. In other words, she wanted to change the map. Yes, she wanted to change the condominium's documents to include my land as part of the community's aesthetic zone of influence, as she herself called the bizarre act. But this wasn't just crazy, it was forgery. And I, a lawyer, have seen a lot of pickpockets in my life, but never one so motivated by hatred of a tractor. The most bizarre thing is that there were neighbors supporting it. 3 or 4 teabaggers thought it was a good idea to expand the tentacles of the HOA to protect property values. Protect from what, my God? From a tractor that won't even start unless it gets 3 punches on the hood and a shove from the cow. But anyway, I heard about this movement through the dark corridors of the system. An acquaintance of mine, who works in the city hall and has a better gossip's nose than a detective's, called me and said, "Get ready. There's a woman here trying to file an altered map with a notarized signature from a notary's office that no longer exists." The woman had presented adulterated documents, old maps digitally modified, spreadsheets with inflated numbers of residents, all in an attempt to convince the local authorities that there was a collective demand to absorb my land as if it were a wart on the community's face. And the most comical thing? She even attached a petition with names that were clearly made up. There was John McFarmer, Linda Tractor Wheel, and even a Bobby Diesel, who I imagine is Vin Diesel's cousin. It was at this point that I realized it was no longer just a question of ownership or tractors. It was psychological warfare, a desperate attempt to tire me out, to push me into surrender through insistence. And I confess, for a few nights, I considered it. I thought about putting the tractor in the garage, painting it beige, putting up a nice tarpaulin, and pretending it was a decorative vase. Because, honestly, the energy this woman drew from me was surreal. But every time I looked out at the field and saw that tractor standing there, with its faded paintwork reflecting the late afternoon sun, I remembered my father. I remembered the day we cleaned the diesel tank with a toothbrush, because we didn't have the money to buy a new one. I remembered the day my grandfather taught us how to change the oil with a cut-up soft drink bottle. That tractor had more history than his wife's entire CV. So I went to the courthouse. I filed a lawsuit for administrative bad faith, attempted falsification of a public document, moral harassment, and collective moral damage. Because, you see, it wasn't just me she was messing with. The woman had already given her neighbor hell over the size of a curtain, fined a teenager for wearing a torn t-shirt in a common area, and once called the police because a rooster crowed before 7 in the morning. And I put it all together. I made a compilation, a complete dossier with anonymous testimonies, prints of passive-aggressive emails she sent to the condo group, and even a video in which she appears measuring the height of the grass with an elementary school ruler. Yes, there is such a thing. The hearing was scheduled quickly. And when she received the summons, she did what every person like that does. She went into denial. She said it was a misunderstanding, that she just wanted to help the community. She tried to play the poor thing, the one fighting for the beauty, the order, the visual purity of the rural world, while in reality, she was just a frustrated control freak, trying to fill the void in her own life by organizing the lives of others. On the day of the hearing, she turned up dressed as if she were the owner of the registry office, a navy blue tailcoat, stiletto heels, and a black folder with all the useless papers she insisted on carrying around as if they were the Constitution. I went with my dirty boots, my worn jeans, and the look on my face of someone who already knew the outcome. Because when you have the truth and common sense on your side, you don't need much. The judge was a firm, direct woman, with no patience for drama. She read the documents, examined the maps, listened to the testimonies, and when she got to the part about the fake names on the petition, she looked up and asked, "Do you really want to maintain that there is a Bobby Diesel living on the lot?" The silence was more eloquent than any defense. The judge not only dismissed her attempt to attach my land to the HOA, but also gave an extra opinion, recommending an investigation of the notary involved and asking for a sanity check on all the minutes produced by that association in the last 2 years. It was like kicking over the house of cards she had built. But even so, she left the forum with her head held high, because that kind of person can't admit defeat. She comes out saying that she's been misunderstood, that there's a lot more at stake, that it's all part of a political persecution. But I know the face of someone who has been defeated with class. I thought the hearing was going to be the end, that after the public beating she took in court, she was going to go back to the hole she came out of, with a folder of false documents under her arm, and swallow her pride with a glass of green juice to get it down better. But no, she decided to become a martyr. That woman had an unshakable vocation for playing the victim, as if every act of her insanity was, in fact, a heavy cross that the unjust world had placed on the shoulders of a misunderstood soul. In the days following the hearing, she began a silent but disgusting smear campaign. And it was no longer just with me. It was towards everyone who somehow didn't fit into the fantasy aesthetic she thought the world should follow. A neighbor who painted her house mustard yellow became a cause for concern for property values. A man who kept 3 chickens in his backyard was called a health risk. Even a resident's dog was targeted because it barked too much and damaged the sound harmony of the neighborhood. It was as if she was desperately trying to prove that the tractor was never the problem. It was the world that refuses to be molded to her standards, that insists on having people with their own taste, personality, and history. People who plant what they want, raise animals, wear boots, and don't exchange dirt for synthetic grass. But with me, she went further. After losing in court, she did something that not even in my worst nightmares as a skeptical lawyer did I imagine anyone would have the nerve to try. She sent an environmental inspector to my property, claiming that the tractor was leaking oil into the soil and was contaminating the local ecosystem. Yes, she called the county environmental agency to report me for contamination. When the inspector arrived, a young man, a bit shy, almost apologizing just for existing, he could barely hide his embarrassment. It was written all over his face that he knew he was being used as a pawn in a lunatic's game. I welcomed him with a cup of coffee, took him to the tractor, showed him the dry floor. No oil stains, no leaks. The engine had been serviced 2 months earlier and was cleaner than a lot of condominium sinks. The inspector filled in the report, apologized to me with a look, and left. 2 days later, the complaint was dismissed for lack of even the slightest indication of irregularity. But then, I asked myself, how long was I going to live like this? Being watched, accused, surrounded by a woman who decided to turn my life into a battlefield just because she couldn't stand to see a tractor grow old with dignity? So I decided to pay her back in kind. Only with method, with calm, with surgical precision. I used everything she had done against herself. I remembered an old conversation with a colleague from the prosecutor's office about a bizarre case of misuse of funds by a residents' association. And you know what hit me? That woman loved leafleting. She loved printing conduct manuals. She loved holding meetings with coffee breaks, personalized gifts, new street signs with flower names. Where did all this come from? From the residents' pockets. I asked for a copy of the HOA's last 3 years of financial transactions. I had to go to court to get access, because the association tried to deny it, saying I wasn't part of the community. Ironic, right? I'm not a member when it comes to seeing documents, but they want to fine me because of a tractor. And when the statements arrived, it was like opening a chest of rot. There were unjustified expenses, inflated budgets, phantom companies supplying aesthetic consultancy services, events paid for with money from the residents' tax that only she and 2 cronies attended. A circus financed with other people's money. I put it all together. I organized it into a report with more evidence than a mafia case. I made sure to send it directly to the public prosecutor's office. It didn't take a month, and the prosecutors were already opening an investigation. When she received the notice at home, I was passing in front of the condominium with the tractor, just to irrigate the field. I saw her on the balcony, motionless, with the white envelope in her hands, and a look on her face that was finally no longer arrogant. She was afraid, and it wasn't fear of me. It was fear of the real world, the world that doesn't care about your CV as president of an association, or your pose as guardian of other people's aesthetics, the world that demands accountability, that demands, that punishes. She disappeared from meetings. She went around wearing sunglasses, as if that would erase the image of her in the corridors of the forum. She tried to resign, but it was too late. The investigation was already underway, and the other members of the association, who had previously laughed at her eccentricities, were now running like rats trying to jump ship. Within 6 months, the HOA was dissolved by court order. The condominium lost its status as an organizing body, and the residents began to manage everything by general meeting, without a president, without delusions, without a woman checking the height of the fences with a sewing ruler. She sold the house shortly afterwards. She left at night without saying goodbye to anyone, like a soap opera villain who flees in the last scene with a suitcase in her hand and her reputation in tatters. Me? I got on with my life. The tractor is still there. Rusty, faithful, stubborn. Sometimes it doesn't even start first time. Sometimes it chokes, drips oil on your shoe, makes noises that scare even a rooster. But it's there, firm, like an old soldier who saw war and survived. That became a symbol, a resistance, a shield. And every time someone new moves to the region and asks, "What about that tractor?" I smile and reply, "That tractor? This one won a war against aesthetics, against the ego, against madness organized on letterhead, and every bit of rust on it tastes like victory." Leave your opinion in the comments and your like. Until the next video.